This is my coworker, Michael McDaniel. And that poster hangs right outside our office, and it shows the heart of Austin, Texas, about 100 years ago. And one day he's standing there and he's drinking his coffee, and I walk up and I ask Michael if he's wondering the same thing I'm wondering, which is, what happened to all the streetcars? And actually he said no, he was wondering if this guy on the motorcycle was about to eat it into a streetcar. And I still wonder that, but actually, at that moment, I went on a bit of a rant about eminent domain and mass transit, and I said things like, you're not going to solve a modern problem with a 200-year-old solution. And Michael said, yeah, we were promised flying cars. Well, I don't know about flying cars, but after that morning, Michael went off and created something called The Wire, and we've been partners in that vision ever since. But before I talk about The Wire, right from the beginning, I want to establish that we believe in the benefits of mass transit. When you have the freedom to choose a form of transportation that best matches your budget and lifestyle, you can build a broader and a more inclusive community. This is one where retailers have more reach for customers and employers have more labor option. But it isn't long when you talk about mass transit these days before the conversation quickly ends up being about, well, how many miles per capita freeway you have, or trains versus buses, or not waiting in traffic. Well, I'm not a traffic engineer. The hair probably tipped you off. I'm a designer, and as a designer, I believe successful systems start with the experience the user is looking for. And when you talk to drivers today, very quickly they will tell you that there are certain fears associated with losing the freedoms of driving their own automobile. So we did that. We talked to drivers in the southern and the western United States. We found two key reasons why they saw this use of mass transit is just not fitting in their lives. First was scheduling was seen as a burden. They had this perception that all mass transit runs at a certain time, and that meant waiting and planning and an adaptation of their lifestyle. And the next was a lack of personal space. They have this perception their car offers them a safe place for them and all their belongings, and they don't want to guard themselves when they're sharing a space with a large number of strangers. So this thought of scheduling as a burden and this fear of crowding, they were two reasons why they told us using mass transit was just impossible. So, what if I told you that across the whole area of mass transit, there's one industry that competes on the basis of how many people they can move per hour without a schedule? And further, they do it moving only 1 to 6 people at a time. I'm talking about the ski industry. This is Zillitar, Austria, and they have a system of 174 lifts and gondolas that can move 298,000 people per hour. That's 7 million people a day uphill, and if they move them downhill too, it's 14 million people. And to put those theoretical maxes into perspective, the New York City subway only has to move about 5.3 million people on any given weekday. But that's not to say that ski lifts are a really excellent urban transit idea. Lots of dropped iPhones. But if you were looking for inspiration on how to move a lot of people without a schedule, the ski industry is an excellent place to start. And one of the innovations you'll find there is called a high-speed detachable gondola. These are 4- and 6-person enclosed cars. They ride on a cable that's supported by towers up in the air, and they move about 12 to 15 miles per hour. They're called detachable because they can release from the cable. They come down and they slow down to about 2 miles per hour.
This is a demonstration.
So this is for easy loading and unloading across a flat, level platform. You can just walk or wheel yourself right on and off. It speeds up, grabs back off to the cable, off down the line, all right? Operation is continuous. You board the first available car, so if you don't want to ride with anyone wearing a Jayhawks jersey, wait 2 seconds, and there'll be another car coming along in just a couple of seconds, right? Now, because they're detachable, this means you can add and remove cars in real time for cleaning and maintenance, or to save energy by matching demand. And the whole system, it runs off an electric motor that's centralized in a wheelhouse, so it can run off of the grid. So let's summarize quickly here. They're up in the air, and they carry 1 to 6 people. As far as I'm concerned, these are flying cars. Now they have no wheels, so let's call this system urban cable. And urban cable is a good thing, because right now cities are taking transportation a lot more seriously. However, if you live in a city that's about 160 years old, especially those in the Midwest, the South, and the western parts of the United States, your city grew up during the transition to the automobile. For the first 50 years of history, it was laid out to the scale of horse and buggy, and for the next 100 years, it passed through the romantic age of the automobile. And at this point, added on suburbs and freeways. And now we find ourselves in a place where the car is a logistical requirement, but it's a little less romantic. And this is especially true in the dense city cores, where you have hardened and established eminent domain. When you're trying to locate mass transit here, it can be a hard problem, and your options get limited. Typically, it means put it on the surface streets, displacing existing capacity. But if you look above the streets and the sidewalks, there's more room up there. And since urban cable rides in the air, you can use that eminent domain. And this gives you a lot more freedom in routing. It helps you put the system where people want to go. Also, there's no stoplights up there, and that's convenient. Construction of urban cable is also different. Rather than the uninterrupted disruption and cost of things like surface rail, cars and towers and cables are modular. First, you build the stops, and then you build the tower locations, and then you bring in the equipment and you bolt it down. This makes for a lot less disruption of residents and businesses, and it also saves a lot of costs. And another thing that saves costs is the ability of urban cable to fly over geographic barriers like rivers or freeways, pretty much with no added cost at all. And so how much does that all add up? Well, if I were to use surface rail as a benchmark, you can build a modern, climate-controlled urban cable system pretty much for half the cost, and this is especially true if you're crossing rivers or freeways. All right, so how does urban cable fit into a transportation system? Well, given the speed and the continuous operation, it works really well as a central circulator or as a way to fly over bottlenecks. As a central circulator, it lays out pretty much the same way as surface rail. Except for by being above traffic, you can achieve a lot more an increased average speed. You get that freedom in routing. And also, you're above traffic. It's an additive system. It's adding capacity rather than displacing. It can ride above cars. It can even ride above trains. And there's magnifiers like bike share and car share that really help make for an effective central circulator. But once you have a central circulator, or if you're already getting one, then there's kind of a new need. How do you get people to and from the circulator? When you move 1 to 3 miles from a dense city core, you start running into bottlenecks. These are typically natural or man-made obstacles like rivers or bridges or freeways. And these are very complex and very expensive places to put mass transit. But urban cable can cross these barriers a lot more effectively and with a lot less cost. So it allows you to piece together a system where you gather up drivers at a congestion point, and then you move them off into a parking garage. They can go from there to their final destination then in less time than they were driving, especially during rush hour if there's like a wreck on the bridge. And this is a lot easier to do if you remove scheduling. People can continue their habit of leaving their house whenever they want to, especially if they know they're not going to get caught waiting at a stop. This new kind of a behavior, it can pull capacity out of the bottlenecks, freeing up room for through traffic. This allows the roads themselves to become more effective, and it reduces the number of miles driven in cars without expecting a profound cultural change. All right, so after that morning, Michael really did, he formed up a team of guerrilla designers. This is them here. They worked very hard, effectively in their free time, building an urban cable vision for my hometown of Austin, Texas. And we called it the Wire, as in take the wire to the convention center and then wire two to the stadium. It just kind of flows off the tongue. This is our vision for a user-friendly, practical mass transit system for cities the size and age of Austin, Texas. And we used design to try and incorporate it into the culture of the city. We wanted people to feel pride in the stations. We wanted to feel like this was part of the way they wanted to move around the city. And that's important, because the most expensive system you can build is the one that nobody uses. Well, with any city, if it's part of the culture, people will use it. And with really good design, it can become an iconic representation of a city. It can even become a force for cultural good. Medellin, Colombia used the advantages of urban cable to transform communities that were geographically blocked from public transportation. The stations went in as civic centers and they stimulated investment, and the locals had this feeling of pride that led to this sense of stewardship. Now, station attendants will keep a stop nice and safe, but in Colombia, the residents themselves developed and enforced their own kind of like a metro etiquette. And flyover actually encouraged property owners to improve their houses, and they stopped this bad habit of throwing trash on the roof. And the Journal of American Epidemiology found that crime is down and microenterprises have sprung up around these systems. And today, Medellin has a 3-line system. It's integrated with bus and rail, carries thousands of people every day. Now, what would it be like to ride the wire? So imagine you're driving in from up north for dinner downtown. Rather than fight the last 2 miles across the bridge, you just pull off and park in a parking garage. It's where you're gonna end up anyways. You walk to the top, there's a wire station right there, right onto the first available car. There's another one coming in 2 seconds, so you feel no guilt about you and your date taking up an entire car. And you glide quietly right across the river on the cable. The views are amazing. The ability to change elevation has allowed the system designer to present you with a panorama of downtown. It's not so much a ride as it is an experience. And like clockwork. You sit down 10 minutes later, knowing your dinner reservation is safe. And the commuter would also appreciate this kind of quiet predictability, especially knowing exactly how long it would take to get to their final destination. And no more 2 bike, 1 bus problem. There's room for you and your bike. All of these things offer commuters the things they told us keep them in their cars in the first place. Predictability, no waiting, more personal space. And there's room to innovate with the stops as well. You can have a surface stop that's very much like a train stop, but you can also imagine multi-use architectural statements. You could use the space above an intersection. You imagine rooftop pocket parks, built-in retail. You can even conceive of a stop integrated into the lower floors of an existing high-rise building. All of that creates new options for public-private partnerships, new ways to fund smart growth, and creates community around commuting. So let me close by saying the technology and the engineering in urban cable has come a long way in the last few years. Things like the wire are definitely something to consider or reconsider. And many cities are using and put in systems today. We took a lot of information and inspiration from them. And a lot of those cities, they use this kind of technology to change course and focus on cost-effective community building transit. But I'm the first to admit, there is no single solution to this transportation problem. There really isn't. And people were putting in a system, it really feels like it's impossible. I think here it probably feels like it's impossible. But they told us that flying cars were impossible. So I say, defy impossible. Thank you.